Hey 8th graders, we are moving on again. We are going to be on the converting to slope-intercept form page of your packet. You should have done the slope-intercept form as your homework, so right now you should be getting pretty good at graphing in slope-intercept form. So what happens is that sometimes we're given an equation and it's not in slope-intercept form and we still want to graph it. So if you look at these four equations, okay, they might all be the exact same line, but they all look differently. And so sometimes what we have to do is we have to change how that equation looks like. And that's what we practiced in chapter 11, those few sections. We were practicing manipulating equations and changing what they look like. So a couple of things. The first one, we're going to start off a little bit simpler. So these ones, they all have y alone, which in slope-intercept form, it's y equals mx plus b. So a couple things I want you to note is that the x term comes first and the y is on one side of the expression. So for example, this first one, the x term is not first, it's second. So what we're going to do is we're just going to switch spots. We're not going to move it to the other side. We are just going to put the positive 1/3 here. And then the positive 2, it just goes like this, plus 2. Okay? The next one, the same thing. This is a plus x. So it's just going to be right here. You could put a 1 there if you want to. And then this is a -3, so we're going to write it -3. The sign is very important. You keep the sign with the term. The next one, this is a -2x. And then this is a 4. Okay. And then the last one, now this one is just a little bit tricky because the y isn't by itself. But we can move this y to the other side. Now this one, we have to do the opposite operation to move it. And that's what's going to happen sometimes. So y equals -3/4 x minus 1. So y equals -3/4 x minus 1. And that's how we get that one to the other side. So if I go through and I graph these, I'm going to have 4 different lines on there. So I'm going to go to the first one, just to recap, this is what we did on Wednesday, sorry. +2, up 1, 1, 2, 3. And if you guys did your IXL, you probably had a lot of practice on these. Okay, your next one, you start at -3. And up 1 over 1, up 1 over 1. And then graph it. The third one, we are going to start at +4, and it's a negative slope, so that means it's going to be going down, down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. And our line goes like that. And our last one, let's see if I have one more color here. I start at -1. My slope is a -3/4. So 1, 2, 3 over 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you draw your line. So it kind of looks like they're all over the place, but they're, excuse me, are where your lines would go. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to practice a little bit on these ones, getting the y by itself. It says convert the following equations to slope-intercept form. So sometimes if the y isn't by itself, you locate the variable, draw your line on both sides of the equation. What do I have to move? I have to move that 2x to the other side. So I'm going to add the 2x to the other side because it's being subtracted. That cancels that out. I get y equals 2x plus 7. And that's your answer. Again, locate your variable that you want to get by itself. We want to get that y alone. So I have to move the 3 away. You don't have to take 1/5 minus 3 because the 1/5 is with the x, so it stays there. So it's just y equals 1/5 x minus 3. Next one, we want to get y alone. You are going to move this entire thing to the other side. How are you going to do that? Well, it's a negative, so we are going to add 2/3 x. We don't want to separate the 2/3 and the x, we want to move it, and that's why we don't divide it. So then those cancel. We end up with y equals 2/3 x minus 5. I write it in the correct form right away. So I know a lot of you might take -5 plus 2/3 x, but we want it in slope-intercept form. Now this last one, we locate the y, it's being multiplied. It's not being added or subtracted like these other ones. So if it's being multiplied, the opposite of multiplication is to divide. The only tricky part is that we can't just divide one term on the other side, we have to divide both of them. So divide both the 4x and the 6. This cancels. 4 divided by 2 is just 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So it simplifies to that. So not super hard. You just have to make sure you're following the steps correctly. Okay, so moving on to the next page. So sometimes it takes multiple steps. These were all one step to get from one form to the other. These ones are going to take more than one step. Okay, so again, follow those same types of rules. You locate the variable. You can draw your line if you want to. The first step is to move whoever is furthest away. So I'm going to subtract that 3x. We want to move the entire 3x to the other side. And that cancels. So now write what you have left. I have 4y equals -3x plus 8. Okay, now this is kind of what we just did on that last step on that other one. We are going to divide by 4, but you have to divide by 4 on everything. So I get y equals -3/4 x plus 8 divided by 4 is 2. Remember, this is our slope, so having fractions is perfectly fine. I don't really want decimals. Actually, I don't want decimals at all. Keep it in a fraction. Okay, your next one. Locate your variable. Who do you want to move first? We're going to move the x first. It's being subtracted, so you're going to add x to both sides. So then I have 7y equals, this is just plus x minus 21. And we're going to divide everything by a 7. Remember, if nothing's with that x, there's a 1 there. 1/7 x minus 3. Okay, next one, get y by itself. So first I'm going to move that 8 to the other side. I have, don't forget that this is still the negative has to come down with that 2. And then my next step is I'm going to divide by that -2. You're going to divide everything by the -2. So positive divided by a negative is a -5/2. Don't change it to a mixed number. And then negative divided by a negative turns this to a +2. So you have to be paying attention to those signs. Okay, so the next two are as hard as it will get. Okay, so sometimes they look absolutely crazy. We've got some steps that we have to do before we can get y by itself. And the first thing we're going to do on these two is distribute. So -4 times y is -4y. -4 times 1 is -4. 6 times x is 6x. 6 times -4 is -24. Okay, so now this looks like kind of what we were doing before. We want to move the 4 over first before we divide. These were like that partner worksheet where you're solving equations with variables on both sides. and then we've got 6x, a negative 24, and a positive 4 gives us a negative 20. Then your next step is to divide everything by that negative 4. Y equals negative. Now I know this is 6/4, but 6/4 can reduce to 3/2. So you can reduce, just don't write it as a mixed number. Maybe I need to show you that 6/4 equals 3/2. Kind of see that on the side. Okay, on the next one here, I am going to distribute first because order of operations tells us to get rid of our parentheses. 4x minus 12. I'm still trying to get y by itself, so I'm going to move the x to the other side. Notice how I write it directly under my x term, because you can combine like terms. So 4x minus x is 3x. And then my last step, remember that if there is nothing with the variable, but there's a negative, there's a 1 there. So I'm going to divide by a negative 1. So this gives me y equals, positive divided by a negative is a negative 3x, and then a negative divided by a positive is a positive 12. So I know these are tricky, but I promise you if you take your time, go through step by step, and show your work, you will not make mistakes. Okay, so the last one, it says, while we're on the topic of weird looking linear equations, let's discover the shape of a couple others. So if you have these two, these are going to be our kind of our special cases. This means that for every single x, y is going to be 3. So it doesn't matter what value you put in there for x, you're going to get 3. Now what this line looks like is it's going to cross the y-intercept, which is your vertical intercept, at positive 3. If you plot these points, they're all going to be on this point. So negative 2, 3, negative 1, 3, 0, 3, they're all right here. On the other side of this, if you have x equals negative 2, what that means is that for every single x value, you're going to get negative 2. So this is a vertical line. And so when y is negative 2, x is negative 2. When y is negative 1, so it goes like this. You guys can see my example here. So the way that I remember this is that if it says y equals something, and this is the only thing they give you, it crosses the y-axis at that number, and it's a perfectly straight horizontal line. If it says x equals negative 2, or negative 5, or 4, it's going to be a straight line crossing the x-axis. So those are kind of your special cases there. Okay. So, if C, and this is what it says, so if C represents any constant, the graph of y equals produces a horizontal line, and the graph x equals C produces a vertical line. Okay. Just a couple little examples here for us to practice. So we're going to graph these. How about I'll graph all the x's in one color. So x equals 4 means it's going to cross the x-axis at 4. So it's just going to be a straight vertical line. Okay, and I'll do x equals 0. It's going to be straight up and down at 0. And x equals negative 3. It's going to be right here. And then I'll do my y's in a different color. So my y equals 2. That means I go up to where 2 would be on my graph. 1, 2. And it's just a straight horizontal line at 2. If I go to y equals -1, it's just down on -1 on the y-axis. And if I go to y equals 0, it's right at the crossing going through the origin right there. Okay, so those are just those special cases. So now back to the original problem. Okay, this is what they started with. So now that you guys know what to do, could you figure out if these are true? So what would be our strategy? I don't know about you guys, but I would solve each equation for y. I want to see if they equal this equation. Now, what is this equation? Our intercept is +2, and our slope, it is a negative slope, and looks like I go down 2 over 3. So if I wrote this equation, y equals -2/3 x plus 2. Slope is -2/3. It crosses at +2. Okay, so I'm going to isolate. I'm going to get y by itself. First one here, subtract 2x. 3y equals -2x plus 6. Then I'm going to divide everything by a 3. Y equals -2/3 x plus 2. Does that one match? It does. Okay. Next one. This one's the hardest just because you have to distribute everything first. So this is 3y minus 12 equals -2x. Make sure you distribute that negative. Okay, now you're still going to get y by itself. So if you're going to work through this equation, I'm going to add that 12 first. So I get 3y equals -2x. -6 plus 12 is a +6. And your last step, you divide by 3, but you divide everything by 3. And if you look here, look at, you can already kind of predict what's going to happen. They're going to be the same. Y equals -2/3 x plus 2. Again, the same. Okay, this one, I'm going to do this one a little bit differently just to show you guys. So we're used to seeing the y on this side. I guess I could flip-flop them too, but I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to move the 12 over, and the reason I'm going to do that is because I am going to make it look like this, because I'm working on getting the y by itself. It doesn't really matter what side that's on. Then I'm going to divide by a -6, so it feels a little backwards, but it's still okay. So 6 reduces to -2/3. -12 divided by -6 is a +2, and then these cancel. So even though the equation reads this way, you can flip-flop each side of this equation. Y equals -2/3 x plus 2. Sorry, same thing. So they are all the same, so you would circle D. They are all correct. Okay, so that's the end of my notes. You guys are going to do this for your homework, the front and the back. Okay, not super hard. And then you guys, if you have questions, obviously take a picture, tell me which one you're working on, and I can help you. And then if you you also have that on IXL. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we will talk to you Monday.